all of these Bible verses in the first chapter of Genesis start so profoundly poetic, and they give us such a grand picture of the way our God works from the very beginning of time, right? How poetic he is, how interwoven into the details he is, how he goes about things in such a rhythmic manner and in such a poetic manner that when our lives are disorderly, right, when things are happening and they don't make sense, this is why you might hear a fellow believer say, what's up, geeks? It's your guy Q here, aka JGTV, and we are back with another one, guys. And today we are in God over culture, and we are going to be talking about the God of the details. Let's get right into it. So, what does culture say about details versus what does God say about details, right? Well, culture doesn't tell us much about details. As a matter of fact, we're taught to obey and practically worship coincidences, right? Most of the time when things happen, there was any detail to it. It's more like, hey, that's life, or these things happen, or they happen by chance, or that was a coincidence, right? God says, I'm not only knee deep in the details, I am the details, right? Like, God literally is so interested in the details that I don't even think we see how much it is woven all throughout Scripture, right? If anything didn't make sense to me personally, it was the way that certain things were explained to me that made sense to most people, right? I personally have never been one to really believe or subscribe to coincidences, or really like things happen by chance or much luck. I've never been the type of person to really kind of co-sign on any of that. If anything, coincidences didn't make sense to me, right? Evolution didn't make sense to me. The Big Bang Theory did not make sense to me, right? Now, I know a lot of this made sense to some other people, and maybe even as a child in class, it made sense to some of the other students, but with me, it just didn't quite add up. And it didn't always make sense to me why it didn't make sense. If you guys are following me, like I said, it just didn't add up. And that was enough for me to kind of go forward and refute a lot of subscribing to the luck crowd or the coincidence crowd, because my mind just always felt like life was just deeper than that. Like, things just didn't happen. For whatever reason it was, I always thought life was deeper than that. You just could not convince me that a coincidence was just the way that life was supposed to be. Living a life as a follower of Christ, it makes perfect sense to me why now those things back then didn't make any sense at all. And that's because God is in the details, right? he's in the details like in a huge way, so huge that we miss it. And I think that we just assume that it's just life happening to us, right? Like we're just kind of going through the motions and forgetting that we serve a God that is actually obsessed with details. And it's all throughout his word. And I'm going to prove it to you guys with not even a lot of scripture, but with the bare minimum I'm going to prove it with. You're going to be able to see it before we even, so much of it before we even leave the book of Genesis. I want to take a look at what God says about details versus what culture has to say about details. We're going to get into some scripture. We're going to start in the book of Genesis. And I actually want to start in Genesis chapter 1 because there is something that is quite remarkable about Genesis chapter 1. And I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but Genesis chapter 1 verse 5, Genesis chapter 1 verse 8, Genesis chapter 1 verse 13, Genesis chapter 1 verse 19, Genesis chapter 123, Genesis chapter 131. All of these Bible verses in the first chapter of Genesis start so profoundly poetic, and they give us such a grand picture of the way our God works from the very beginning of time, right? How poetic he is, how interwoven into the details he is, how he goes about things in such a rhythmic manner and in such a poetic manner that when our lives are disorderly, right? When things are happening and they don't make sense, this is why you might hear a fellow believer say, well, we serve a God of order. We don't serve a God of chaos. Because all throughout scripture, we can see how obsessed with details God is. So the one thing that all of those verses in the first chapter of Genesis have in common is they all start like this. And evening passed and morning came, making it the next day, right? So it doesn't say making it the next day, it says making it the first day. So it says, and evening passed and morning came, making it the first day. And evening passed and morning came, making it the second day. And evening passed and morning came, making it the third day. And evening passed and morning came, making it the fourth day. And evening passed and morning came, making it the fifth day. And evening passed and morning came, making it the sixth day. And it can sound so redundant when I keep saying it. It can almost sound uncomfortable because that just goes to show you how much we are not obsessed with details and God is. This is just so poetic. And this was something that after watching a sermon by Pastor Judah Smith, this sermon really helped me so much with just chaos and things kind of being all over the place, and how when things are out of order for us, they're not nearly as close as out of order for God. They're not out of order for God at all. So we really are the ones scrambling while we serve an extremely rhythmic, poetic God. I want to jump over to Genesis chapter 2, and I want to read you guys verses 10 to 14. I want you guys to see exactly how this is laid out here. Right here, we're getting a description of the Garden of Eden, somewhat, and its surroundings, more its surroundings than the garden itself. But just look at how detailed this is, and look at things that God makes sure that we can see going on. It's almost like you can paint a picture as you read this because it's so detailed and it's so descriptive. A river flowed from the land of Eden, watering the garden and then dividing into 4 branches. The first branch, called the Pishon, flowed around the entire land of Havilah, where gold is found. The gold of that land is exceptionally pure. Aromatic resin and onyx stone are also found there. The second branch, called the Gihon, flowed around the entire land of Cush. The third branch, called the Tigris, flowed east of the land of Asher. The fourth branch is called the Euphrates. So I just love reading this because it's like we can just see how descriptive and how into the detail that God is when it comes to just him describing something just as simple as surroundings. He even puts that, hey, in these surroundings, these are the kind of elements you'll even find while you're in that land.